Hello, I'm Emma-Louise Coffey and you're welcome to the Dairy Edge, the Teagasc Dairy podcast. We're bringing you the latest information, insights and opinion to improve dairy farm performance. On this week's episode of the Dairy Edge, Danny Bermingham gives insight into how he is achieving high-level performance on a difficult land type, and also reflects on his autumn grazing targets and how they differ to the standard guidelines.
I suppose we'll say I'm farming, since 1989, really. My father died young. He was 51 years of age. And but I'm farming my own right since 1996. The farm, my mother handed over the farm in 1996. But prior to that, I suppose, in my father's time, we'll say he would have bought, maybe 40 acres, 2 or 3 acres, 2 or 3 years before he died. So there was a lot of debt to be paid at the time. And I suppose being so young at the time, I will say it was really 96 that the farmers handed over. But I suppose we really got into it in 2000 and 2003 when we started all the infrastructure buildings. So there's been, I suppose, prior there was 30 hectares my father's time. Maybe we can basically I can remember back in the day. He went from a pipeline parlour to 4-unit new 4-unit Delaval parlour in the late 70s, and we built an 8-unit. We drove for 10-unit ourselves in 2003, and this year now we have a 16-unit. We put in a 16-unit parlour. So I suppose that'll give you an insight to, I suppose, where we've come from and to where we are now. There's been a lot of development in the farm, but I suppose the fact that 40 acres was bought prior to my father dying, I suppose we wouldn't be where we are today, really, you know.
And how did cow numbers reflect that growth, Danny?
Well, sure, look, we were, as I said, we were only making it a 4-unit in the late 70s, so we'd have gone from maybe 20 cows. Now there's an outblock. We'll say part of the land that was bought, there was a kind of a field that was, there was a right, you know, it was kind of, the access to that ground was basically for silage or beef cattle. So we'll say I suppose 2000, in the early 2000, I suppose 2000 and 2003 or 4, I suppose we accessed that land because one of the fields we put a roadway through it, so there was it just increased an extra 15 or 16 hectares to the block. We owned that land, but there was one field that was connecting it to closer to the home farm, so that opened up a lot of. So basically, we've been increasing cow. There wasn't a very big influx of cow numbers. It was a steady progress, really.
And where are cow numbers at today, Danny? And can you give us some insight into the herd performance?
Today we're at 111 cows. Last year we produced 520 kilos of solids. There probably was more in them because we dried off early because there was a parlour going on and we had to dry off early. There was about 30 days, maybe 25 or 30 extra days of milk we lost there in December. So I suppose, yeah, we have, you know, I suppose coming from where we were, sure, I mean, 500 kilos of solids 10 or 15 years ago was, Jesus, it was very, very, you'd think you'd never get there, you know. So I suppose over time now that has been exceeded. So we're going for, you know, that's been exceeded. So we're heading for new targets now at this stage.
And I guess if you put a figure on it, Danny, say take a 25 days, even being really conservative with high solids at the end of the year, a kilo a day across 25 days, you're up on 545 kilos of solids per cow. And I suppose on that, Danny, you know, as part of, you know, looking at some of your information, 10 years ago at the start of the Heavy Soils programme, you would have been at 430 kilos of solids per cow. So at 520 last year, that shows that on average you've increased solids by 10 kilos per year. How have you achieved that?
Well, I suppose, look, there's a numerous things, Emma-Louise. I suppose number one, I suppose the grass situation. I mean, utilization of grass, and the since we start measuring grass, I suppose it really has upped our performance in terms of milk production. Getting more days in grass. I suppose also the fact that we're compact calving. No, we don't calve very early. We don't start calving till around the 12th of May, or sorry, 12th of February, purely because the nature of our soil. So we need a compact calving to produce the days in milk. So the days of milk are very important. Normally, I think prior to last number of years, we used to be drying off cows in around the 1st of December. But now we just dry off cows purely on body condition score, whether that be first calvers or whatever. We just dry them off in body condition score regardless, and we dry off around the 20th of December regardless. So there's an extra maybe 20 days of milk, 25 days of milk got there, but we have to have the compact calving in the springtime to create the days of milk. And also, I suppose, breeding, like we've always been breeding there's never been stock bulls used in the farm from as long as I'm farming it, and so I suppose breeding has a big part to play in that as well,
Yeah, and looking to the compact calving, as you mentioned, another metric that you can see from your performance over the past 10 years, the 6-week calving rate has increased, and that reflects the compactness of the calving season. And you're achieving the industry target of 90%, coming from a base of say 75%. Is there anything in particular you did from a cow management perspective to improve that 6-week calving rate?
Well, I suppose we have we've always plenty of replacements, so we always replacements are never sold on the farm. So basically, what we do is once there's always plenty of there's always excess cows at the end of calving season. So we always sell our April calvers. If we reach our target cow numbers by the end of March, we'll sell our April calvers, basically.
And on that, Danny, then what sort of I suppose herd structure have you in terms of maturity? Bringing in those heifers, or carrying the additional heifers, is that leading to a lower herd age for you?
I think our lactation average at the moment is 3.7. That's at the moment. In 2015, it was 2.9. So that'll give you. We're kind of we haven't increased cow numbers as such in the last number of years. It's been kind of static enough, but I suppose there is scope for more cow numbers, but that's all relative to the grass growing throughout the year and whatever. But I suppose the 4.5 is the optimum lactation average if we can get it. But obviously that is the fact that it went from 2.9 to 3.7 in 2015, for example. We produced 437 kilos of milk solids. In 2021, 2020, it was 520. So I suppose 2.9 to 3.7, that has a bearing on that extra milk solids as well.
Yeah, the herd maturity really impacts on that for sure. I suppose I wasn't planning on getting into it at this stage, but you have mentioned it, Danny. In relation to stocking rate, you mentioned 111 cows, and you're at a stocking rate just shy of 2.5 cows per hectare on the milking platform. Maybe a comment from yourself. I know, in some instances, milking platforms, people really push the boundaries up at 3 cows per hectare. For your farm, is 2.5 the optimum? Or do you see that increasing or decreasing into the future?
I'd say increase, Emma-Louise, because as I said, like we carry all replacements and on the farm. That all on the milking platform. Now there's a X amount of ground, very small X that's leased, all right, but that would carry replacements as well. But there is, if we had to increase in cow numbers, there is the option of contract rearing. But I think we could go to 120 cows, no problem at all, to be honest, on current situation at the moment. But I suppose just we'll just have to wait and see. Like there is, I suppose the land drainage and reseeding has a big role to play in that as well.
And an interesting point to follow on, you mentioned drainage and reseeding, and if we look at your Twitter bio, you mentioned that you're aiming to reseed and drain 10 acres per year, to produce white gold from grass. So you really are looking at that grass-based system, Danny. Talk through drainage methods that you're using, and we might talk then about reseeding as a follow-on.
Yeah, I suppose there's 46 hectares in the milking platform, but I suppose realistically there isn't one dry field in the farm, so a lot of every bit of our ground has to be drained. So I suppose prior to the heavy size program, the way you used to drain ground was on the mud. We used to maybe just go down maybe a foot into just with a tile drain bucket and fill it with stone. There was no pipe or anything used. But to be honest, a lot of those drains, where they've worked for a period, but they're all obsolete at this stage. But since joining the heavy size program, I suppose we learned the right techniques of drainage, and it has really transformed the farm, to be honest. A lot of our farm now is mud nature, clay. So after doing the soil test pits, there's no permeable layer underneath. So basically what we're trying to do here is we're never going to dry the farm. What we're trying to do is we're trying to get the rainwater away as fast as we can. So in order to do that, we go down 1 meter in depth with our drains. We put in our corrie pipe. We use the GFC corrie pipe here with the smooth wall inside. They come in 20 foot lengths, and we fill that with stone up to, we fill it with whatever bit of soil we have. We just kind of leave it to the side. There's maybe 2 or 3 inches, 4 inches, 5 inches maybe max on the mud soil. So we just keep that aside, and basically the drains are nearly filled to the top, to be honest. And when we come along then, and we go with we get our mole plow. We have a naked mole, no gravel mole, and we go. All the drains are put in at 15 meters apart, so we go across them with the mole plow. I suppose the reason why they're 15 meters apart is because we'll say when we're going across them with the mole plow, if we meet stones or obstacles along the way, and that mole lifts, it can go either side of that 15 meters to the either drains, if you get me. And each drains are going to an outflow, like we call them head trenches here. There could be, I suppose, 6 foot and 7 foot in depth. 6 foot, 5 foot, they vary basically. So all our drainage is dependent on our outflows, really, how deep we can go. But generally we have no problem that way, because we have plenty depth in our outflow drains.
And Danny, looking to drainage, and I suppose putting drainage in place on the farm, I suppose could you comment on the percentage of the farm that you have drained at this point? And also, I guess as a follow-on, speaking with Pat Toohey, who would have given us some insight into the heavy soils program, and I guess heavy soils in general, he would mention that in some instances there is no financial benefit to completing it, and it's too costly an exercise. Is that the case for some of the land you're farming?
I wouldn't say so at all, to be honest. For example, we'll say we had a control plot the time we started off the program. I think that was only grown prior to the program, which was only grown maybe 6 ton. It was very wet now, a very wet field. But since, I suppose that's been averaging maybe 11, 12 and a half ton since we joined the program. So like if you take into example, we'll say, now it's not cheap, James. It's not cheap. It's costing around €6,000 per hectare, so roughly around 2,500 to 3,000 an acre. But we'll say for the amount of grass grown, it's especially now, we'll say in my own situation where I'm milking cows. So I mean, it is because we need grass, good grass for those cows to produce. So it's payback is maybe 5 or 6 years. I'd say you'll be getting payback. So it's well worth the investment, to be honest. Very, very, I suppose it's the only way we can. Like I can remember the farm here, even the place that was bought, it was a mess with rushes. There was very little rushes. There's hardly no rush in the farm now at all. I suppose a number of it's just an low drainage that accounts for that as well. Just soil fertility, and soil fertility is a big player in the whole thing as well.
And looking then as a final note on I guess this line of conversation with the heavy soils program, you mentioned that you've improved the type of drainage you're doing and selecting the right techniques. But to you, what are the key benefits and learnings for you engaging in that heavy soils program?
Oh, sure. Look, I suppose number one, I suppose the fact that the drainage, the right type of drainage to use on your farm. Now, every farm is soil, it is all different. So, I mean, it just so happens that drainage system works for my farm. It might work for another person's farm. But I suppose, that's just very important. Like even our own farm, there's a number of different soil types. But like, I mean, predominantly the clay type, that's where we have to go with our drainage. I suppose number two, the soil fertility side of things, that has really come to the fore in the program as well. To getting I suppose one time, for example, like lime and ground here was not really talked about because of I suppose the myth that was lime and heavy ground was going to boil it. It was basically it was going to make it worse, but which is not the fact at all. No, we've this year alone we put out 110 ton of lime on our ground and because we're site sampling every year, so we're targeting all the low pH fields. So we'll say we're not going excessive lime. It's about 2 ton to the acre, and it's really turning the place around as well in terms of fertilizer utilization, the whole nitrates. It's good for the environment. It's a no-brainer really. So soil fertility has been a big factor in the heavy soils program, and I suppose pushing us to where we are now. We're like we don't want to be growing 16, 17 ton of grass on average. If we're growing about 14 or 15 ton of grass, 14 ton I'd be very happy with, because utilization is a big problem. And when I say utilization, a big problem, I'm talking about the springtime and the autumn.
And let's get into that in a little bit more detail, Danny. For people listening in, they will recognise the name or they'll know you as, a former Grass 10 champion on disadvantaged or heavy land type. I know no 2 years are the same when we look at grazing, and particularly in the last few years, there has been huge variation. But, you mentioned the spring is a challenge. Can you talk us through, a typical grazing season on your farm?
Well, I suppose look at we try. Well, we'll start at the back end. So, like we start building grass. I suppose from now on we'll start building, but we don't. I suppose our peak grass average farm cover will be about mid-September, which would be we don't want to go between 900 and 1,000 of a farm cover. So basically, what we do is like we're housed normally the 1st of November. Like to get to the 1st of November here grazing is a bonus. It could be the end of October. So we don't really go on autumn targets or anything like that. Basically what we do is we just graze the farm down to nothing. So we could have a very low average farm cover by the 1st of November, could be down in 250, 300 of an average farm cover. But we don't mind because the fact that we don't get out late. We get out late in the springtime. So we open up by the time we start grazing in the springtime, our farm cover is up in 1,000 again. Our average farm cover. Now, if we can graze in February, we'll graze in February. But we'll say, look, go on experience. Because the amount of times we get to graze in February is few and far between, to be honest. So, realistically, we're looking at March. Even like Paddy's Day is a kind of a target for us. No, we'll get out grazing if we can. It's all weather dependent. If ground is allowing us to graze in February, we'll graze in February, and we're not worried about the grass that we'll run out of grass, because 10 times out of 10 we'll be going back in anyways. So, we could be going back in, we could be grazing 5 or 6, maybe 7 or 8 days in February, and they could be going back in for another month. And that has been the case throughout the years. So we never run out of grass. We never run out of grass in the springtime. Actually, this spring now, for example, the low growth rates in April suited our farm because we still had a lot of grass in the farm, and we still had to close off. Like, we don't graze. We never graze out the whole farm, the milking block, because we've to take out paddocks because we've too much grass. So, that low growth rate in April is actually suited us, and it was dry as well, which meant that we were able to graze a lot more ground basically. And because if we got big growth rates in April, with the amount of grass we'd have in the farm, grass would go out of control very fast.
I think it really, really interesting insight, Danny. And I know for the likes of yourself, when you hear of somebody on a relatively dry, free draining farm, when they're saying, oh, conditions are tough if there's some heavy rainfall, I'm sure you're rolling your eyes thinking you've no idea. When you talk about, a realistic target is maybe getting out for a few days in February, but really getting out to grass is something that's happening around St. Patrick's Day, when a lot of people are almost at the end of their first rotation. Also interesting that you mentioned that you house on the 1st of November. That's a good autumn and, dry, good weather conditions. I suppose what you're talking about in terms of your targets that you're setting, the peak cover in mid-September, what you're targeting is behind, I guess, what the gold standard grass 10 targets would be, but it mimics, I suppose, what you need for the next month and a half on the farm, closing very low in terms of a farm cover, well behind target. I suppose they talk about things like 600, 650, you're well below that. But as you say, you don't have that big glut of demand on the 1st of February because conditions don't necessarily allow. I think your story, your grazing story, is very similar to someone we've spoken to before on the Dairy Age, Liam Hanrahan. He's not too far from you in terms of farm location. I guess from the perspective of people listening in who are in a similar situation to you with a heavier type farm, or somewhere in the middle where some of the farm is heavy and some of it is free draining, what are the key things that you're doing in order to get cows out for those few days that you talk about in February, and also extending the grazing rotation into November?
I suppose farm infrastructure is very important in terms of that situation, Emma-Louise. I suppose, we've a lot of spur roads and put in place. Now, when I say we've a lot more to put in as well. Multiple access points in paddocks. Now we've gone to the stage now where we're putting. We'll say we're putting access points in every. Like the nature of it's a long narrow strip. We've a long narrow farm, so by default we have a lot of roadways anyways. But so what we're doing is, we'll say, when we're it just so happens that we've done a lot of fencing there in the last, could be purely because a lot of our stakes that they were rotten, so we do the whole lot. But along the farm roadways now we're putting stakes down 8 meters apart, and we're putting gap handles between each stake. So basically, there's gap handles along the whole farm roadway. So we have great control over our paddocks, in terms of back fencing and the whole lot with the situation like that. And I find that it really does make a big difference. As regards minding ground, because look, it's costing a lot to drain it. It's just not a case when you drain it, you just let them in and forget about it. We just have to mind the ground as well after doing it. So like there's a lot of back fencing involved, and there's, like as I said, the nature of our ground is it's of our farm. Sorry, it's a long narrow strip, so there's a lot of roadways involved. So we just have the roadways there. So we try to get out as much as we can in the springtime if conditions allow. Even when they're borderline, but there comes to a stage as well that you just have to stop and say, look, it's not worth it.
And a final question on, I guess, the whole system, Danny, that people might be interested to hear. You know, you mentioned that engaging in the heavy soils program and being really effective with your drainage is giving you the opportunity to get out to grass, more days at grass in the year. But there's no perfect year, and it's not a situation where you're out from the 1st of February to the 1st of December by any means. But would you have an idea of what the average supplementation level would be in the year? So while the cows are in milk, what sort of concentrate and silage you'd be feeding as a buffer to grazed grass?
We normally feed around a ton of ration. I'm happy feeding the ton of ration, to be honest. I don't. It's just the nature of our game. A ton of ration. I'm happy, especially with the only thing is, though, I'd say is the fact that if we're feeding a ton of ration, we have to be putting it out the other end. Like we'll say, so I suppose the 520 kilos of milk solids. If we were doing only 420 kilos of milk solids and a ton of ration, I'd be very kind of dubious about that. So, at least the way I look at it is the fact that we're inside, our cows have to produce. That we need good feed. We have surplus bales. We have we're on a 3-cut system from an out farm. Well, a lease block out and a leased out block. That's where the silage comes from. So that's cut in early May. That's a 3-cut. So basically, we have to have good silage, basically. So, I mean, that has changed. That's another thing that has come from the heavy size program. Like the fact that we're inside, cows are inside a lot. They need. I mean, going for bulk is a no. You need good quality silage for cows milking in the springtime and when they're housed in the autumn. Is, they won't milk off of silage that's gone too strong, or we aim for. We were getting about 72% DMD silage. Whereas before it was up in 62, 63, so I suppose that all helps as well. So
yeah, and that in culmination with the concentrate will keep the cows milking and in good condition.
It will, yeah.
While housed.
Yeah.
It was great to get insight from you today, Danny, on your farm system and get an alternative view on how you manage grass in the autumn and spring, taking cognizance of your conditions. I look forward to catching up late in the year, Danny, to hear have those cows surpassed the 520 kilos of milk solids and are they closer to the 550? Thank you, Danny.
Thank you, Emma-Louise.
That's it for this week's episode of the Dairy Edge podcast, and my thanks to Danny Bermingham for joining me on this week's show. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe to the podcast. You can listen on Apple and Google Podcasts as well as Spotify. And for more information, go to the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie. I'm Emma-Louise Coffey, and join me next time for your Dairy Edge.